Hi there, my name is Liam and I am just at the start of the second year of my English Literature PhD at the University of Birmingham. What that means is that roughly a year ago, I made the trip up to Brum to begin my PhD journey. And blimey, what a mad year it's been, right? Anyway, I've found myself reflecting quite a bit recently, thinking about the tips or advice that I wished I had had before I started my PhD. So, with that in mind, what are the 5 tips that I wish I had before I started my PhD? Let's find out. So the first thing I would have told myself was to be careful when taking on extracurricular responsibilities. I don't think I've really spoken about my extracurricular activities in my videos at all. So for a bit of context, this last year I was one of the general editors for Ad Alta, the Birmingham Journal of Literature, and I also set up, organised and ran the Dystopia's reading group at the university as well. Both of these were really brilliant opportunities, as they allowed me to meet loads of really fascinating people, chat about some really cool ideas, and see some really amazing work. The journal, for which I've put a link in the description in case you're interested, epitomises all of these things. However, extracurricular projects are an awful lot of work, especially when you're in charge of them. At times, I would say that these responsibilities accounted for one day's worth of work each week, whether that was because of various editorial duties or because I was locating readings, writing discussion prompts, and generally promoting and organising the reading group. All of this inevitably ate into my research time. I feel that the first year of a PhD should be about finding your feet and getting to grips with your research project, which I think I would have achieved a bit sooner had I had fewer extracurricular responsibilities. I'm not saying that I regret taking part in either of these projects because I think it was really important for me to meet lots of new people at the start of a PhD, certainly having moved to a new city. But if I had my time again, I probably would have only picked up one of these responsibilities in the first year of my PhD journey. Or if I'd done both of those things, I would have probably sought a less senior position on the journal. That way, I would have been able to focus a bit more on getting to grips with my research topic and make some discoveries months and months earlier. Secondly, I would have told myself to label and organise my notes much more effectively. A PhD lasts 3 years, and in that time you're bound to do loads of reading and make pages and pages and pages of notes. Something you read at the beginning of year 1 might suddenly become relevant right at the end of year 3. You never know, and as such you need to make sure that all the work you do on day 1 still makes as much sense as possible on day 1001. This is something that I didn't really appreciate until recently, probably because in my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees so far, I was quite used to just focusing on my essays for maybe 1 month at a time, doing some intense research and some intense writing, and then never really having to think about them ever again. As such, my notes documents would contain lists of sources, so bibliographic details of books that I'd read or links to journal articles that I found online. And underneath all of those entries, I would just bullet point quotations that I thought were useful. Because I was only ever working on those essays for a really short time, I'd be able to open up the documents, look at the notes I'd made, and instantly remember why I'd chosen them. Now though, I look back at the notes that I made like 6 months ago, and I have to try really hard to understand why I made them at all. What was I thinking when I selected a quotation? What relevance did I see in it? What was the general argument of the source I had taken that quotation from? As such, I've recently started to change the ways that I label and organise my notes. First of all, I make frequent use of the comments function on Word so that I can explain things to future Liam about the quotations that I have selected. Sometimes I might write a note that explains how I think a quotation might fit into my argument or current thinking about an idea. Sometimes I remind myself that I've chosen a quotation purely because I think it expresses an idea particularly elegantly, and so it might be something that I might choose to use in future as a model for good writing. Other times I use the comments function to make connections between one quotation from one source and another quotation from a different source, noting how they might support or disagree with each other, and then also where I situate my own argument in relation to that. As well as comments about specific quotations, I also try to make a broad comment about each source too, which I tend to attach to either its bibliographic information or its link if it is a digital source. In this comment, I make a note of the general argument of the source and then also have a quick word about how useful or relevant I generally thought it was. My hope here is that I will be able to have a look at my notes in future and more clearly see what the sources are on about, and so hopefully that will help me to find more quotations or even extra sources should I need them. But it's not just inside the notes documents where I've refined my labelling and organisation. I now have a much more intricate system of arranging where these note documents are stored on my laptop. I have a folder for novel-specific notes, a folder for general theoretical notes, and folders for specific theories or topics that are relevant to my thesis. And if there are some notes that are relevant to multiple areas, so relevant to maybe both a novel and also a different topic, guess what? I save them in both those folders just to make sure they are easily locatable. Further to this, I use the tag feature when I save my documents. I had never really paid much attention to this feature at all before, but turns out when you save a document, you can also tag it with several keywords, which basically helps even more when it comes to searching. I guess it's almost a bit like hashtagging an Instagram post or a tweet. It adds metadata that helps to make it more findable later on. The third tip I would have told myself is that I need to be writing something, however small, each and every working day. Because of the gap I took between my PhD and my English degrees, I was very rusty when it came to writing academically, which is something I'm pretty sure I've mentioned in previous PhD vlogs. Last year, I would go through intense periods of researching non-stop, and then maybe switch to a week or two of intense writing. I think part of the reason for this was because I was actually a bit scared to write because I knew I was out of practice. But then by consistently putting it off, my writing was never going to get any better. It was a bit of a vicious cycle really. I would put off writing because I was rusty, then have to write something, be disappointed in what I had written because it was rusty, and then afterwards put off writing again because I was disappointed, which only made me rustier still. What I am not suggesting to myself is that I write thousands and thousands of words every day for the rest of my PhD. Instead, I think that I need to set aside a small amount of time each day to put some ideas down on paper, even if that's only half an hour. On days where I do loads of reading and make loads of notes, I need to at least toy around with putting some of those ideas and quotations into a short paragraph. On days where I'm collating and condensing my notes, I need to maybe put together a brief outline of an argument that uses those ideas. On days where I'm doing more admin-based work, I need to make sure that I jot down something informal at the very least that expresses my current thoughts and ideas about my research. Simply put, I believe that the more consistently I put ideas down on paper or on the screen, the better I'm going to get at expressing my writing. Tip number 4 would be that I would tell myself to see the value of reading beyond my thesis. You see, this time last year, if a novel or piece of criticism wasn't clearly related to literary dystopias, intertextuality, metafiction, and so on, I wasn't interested. I'm embarrassed to say, that I was really close-minded and viewed reading anything that wasn't immediately relevant to my thesis as a waste of time. And I'll tell you what, how foolish was I? Earlier on this year, when I expressed that I was finding writing difficult to get back into, my supervisors gave me a list of books to read. When I first saw this list of books, I was a bit puzzled because they weren't immediately obviously related to my thesis. However, skeptically, I found the books and started to make my way through them. And eventually, I saw why these books were recommended to me. It was not for what they were talking about, although, you know what, sometimes it was interesting. Instead, they are recommended to me because of how they were talking about their ideas. My supervisors wanted to expose me to different writing styles and approaches and writerly voices so that I could better figure out which ones I found more enjoyable or interesting or useful. Basically, they wanted to give me loads of high quality writing models for me to either emulate, assimilate, or even consciously reject. Because of that, my writing is, I hope, getting better, even though it definitely still has quite a way to go. Secondly, reading outside your thesis area can lead to some really exciting discoveries. I won't get into it in too much detail, but basically, when I first started to feel that reading beyond my thesis area wasn't a total waste of time, I picked up a book on post-truth because I just thought the idea was generally quite interesting. Well, I read that book, and then another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one, and kind of got myself down a bit of a rabbit hole. And now actually, it seems that ideas relating to post-truth are going to feature quite significantly in my thesis. If I had remained so closed off to reading outside what I thought was my stuff, then that would not have happened, and my thesis would not have developed in the exciting ways that it has. Finally, I would like to go back and tell myself that it is totally okay to not know absolutely everything. As I said at the start of the video, I have met so many fascinating people this last year. People who are incredibly well educated and incredibly well read, sometimes intimidatingly so. There have been a number of times this last year where I have heard people discuss certain books or theorists or theories or concepts or terms that have just gone completely over my head. For a long time, that made me feel awful. I thought that I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough or smart enough or well read enough to be doing a PhD. I would just sit there and nod and say something really useless like, well yeah, or of course, or I hadn't thought of it that way before, just to fit in and not have people think that I was a total idiot. I still struggle with this an awful lot, to be honest, but I am trying to be more open about my knowledge gaps and ask people to explain things in greater detail for me if I don't quite understand what they're talking about. I'm open to finding out more about new things, especially if it leads me to a really vital thesis discovery. But at the same time, I'm not going to fret about not knowing absolutely everything about absolutely everything, because the odds are most of that stuff is not going to end up being super important to my thesis, or, you know what, my existence more generally. At the end of the day, a human being can only know so much information. And you know what? I am more than happy to be a human being. Okay, so those are 5 tips that I wish I had before I started my PhD. If you are starting a PhD soon, or even some other form of university degree, I hope that's been helpful or even reassuring in some way. Ultimately, a PhD is one big learning curve, and I'm sure I will look back in another year's time and give myself another set of advice. And that's okay. Nobody is going to get this process totally perfect straight away, if ever. But as long as we learn from it, develop, progress, then you know what? It's all worth it. What I'm trying to say is, we've got this.